In every journey of growth, there's a moment before the moment. A moment when everything is still, when the world is quiet, and all you have is a spark inside you, waiting to awaken. It's a spark you may not always see, a spark others may overlook, but it never disappears. It grows in silence, gathers strength in the shadows, and prepares you for something greater. And then, the first crack appears. A crack in old habits, a crack in old beliefs, a crack in the story you were told about your limits. That crack widens, your perspective shifts, your vision sharpens, and suddenly, there's no going back. Because once you see your potential, you cannot deny it. The spark becomes a surge, the surge becomes a wave, and the wave becomes a burst of pure possibility, breaking through every layer of doubt, every barrier, every shadow that once held you down. In that burst, something new emerges, a new identity, a new posture, a new sense of purpose. You stand taller, clearer, stronger. And from that moment on, you don't walk into the future the same way. You step forward with confidence, with intention, with the power to transform not just your work, but your life. This is your awakening. This is where your transformation begins. Welcome to episode 2 of the Mission Ready Leadership Series, Kotter's 8-Step Process Reimagined. Today, we're taking one of the most widely referenced models in organizational change and putting it back into its proper context. Because Kotter's model is not a checklist, and it was never meant to be one. This episode reframes the 8 steps as a true execution engine, a sequence of leadership actions that build momentum, create alignment, and operationalize change. Over the next several slides, we'll break down the logic behind Kotter's work, expose the common mistakes leaders make when misusing the model, and modernize each step for today's workforce, hybrid environments, digital systems, and teams operating under chronic fatigue. You'll learn how Kotter's model fits into the tri-model framework, how sequencing drives execution, and why skipping even a single step can cause the entire change effort to collapse. This episode is not just an academic review. It is a practical, mission-ready reintroduction of the 8 steps as a living, dynamic tool for leading change that lasts. Let's begin. John Kotter's 8-step process remains one of the most influential change models ever created, not because it is perfect, but because it gives leaders a sense of sequence. Kotter clarified that change is not a set of activities happening at once. It is a cascading journey that builds momentum as each step prepares the next. However, the modern workplace has shifted dramatically since Kotter introduced his model. Organizations are faster, flatter, more distributed, and more digital. People resist rigid playbooks, and change is no longer an occasional project. It is a constant environment. What still makes Kotter essential is the logic. Urgency creates focus, coalitions create power, and wins create belief. What must evolve is the way these steps are interpreted, timed, and integrated with modern tools, workforce expectations, and AI-driven decision system. Kotter's model was never meant to be motivational fluff. It was designed as a sequence of conditions that must be created in the right order if change is going to stick. Most leaders treat the steps like a to-do list, but the real power of Kotter's thinking is the logic behind the sequence. He understood that people will not act without urgency, will not commit without vision, will not move without empowerment, and will not sustain anything without reinforcement. In other words, the model is less about steps and more about psychological and organizational readiness. Each stage removes a barrier that would stop the next stage from working. Skip one, and the chain collapses. That's why Kotter's work continues to matter, not because of tradition, but because the sequence mirrors how human beings and organizations actually adopt or reject change. Most leaders don't fail at Kotter's model because it's outdated. They fail because they unknowingly distort the sequence, skip critical steps, or rush ahead under pressure. Executives often jump straight into communication without establishing true urgency. Managers try to generate wins before building a guiding coalition. Organizations announce change before laying the groundwork for adoption. These errors are not personal flaws, they're structural patterns. Kotter's model still works, but only when leaders understand why each step exists and how skipping even one creates downstream resistance. In this episode, we'll unpack the most common misuses of Kotter's steps and show how modern workplaces amplify these mistakes. This sets the stage for a more precise, execution-driven approach to change. Kotter's 8-step model was originally created for large, traditional organizations where change moved slowly. Today's environment is the opposite: distributed teams, hybrid work, rapid cycles, and constant disruption. Reframing the 8 steps for modern workforces means shifting from rigid sequencing to adaptive sequencing. It means replacing formal meetings with real-time communication, replacing top-down messaging with collaborative sense-making, and allowing wins to emerge faster and more organically. Modern change doesn't wait for permission. It blends urgency with psychological safety, speed with clarity, and structure with flexibility. The steps still matter, but how we perform them has evolved. When change fails, leaders often blame culture, communication, or lack of buy-in. But the real issue is usually sequencing failure. Skipping steps in Kotter's model doesn't save time. It multiplies resistance, confusion, and mistrust. If urgency isn't real, people won't care. If a coalition isn't built, there's no power behind the change. If the vision isn't clear, movement becomes fragmented. If wins never materialize, the belief dies out. Organizations pay for skipped steps in delays, turnover, rework, disengagement, and ultimately in the collapse of the change initiative. This slide exposes the hidden costs and shows why sequencing is not optional, it's structural. You cannot cheat human behavior, and you cannot cheat organizational momentum. In Kotter's model, the first 2 steps determine whether the rest of the process is even possible. Step 1 is creating purposeful urgency, not panic, not fear, and not artificial pressure. Purposeful urgency means helping people understand the stakes of inaction and the opportunity behind the change. It's about clarity, not chaos. When urgency is authentic, it creates movement. When it's forced, it creates resistance. Step 2 is building the alignment team, often misinterpreted as forming a committee or pushing authority downward. In reality, the alignment team is a cross-functional group of credible influencers who model the change through their own behavior. They are not cheerleaders, they are activators. Together, these 2 steps create the foundation for everything that follows. Urgency generates energy. The alignment team channels that energy into direction. Without both, the rest of the sequence collapses. Steps 3 and 4 focus on alignment through meaning and movement. Step 3 is the strategic narrative, the story that connects the change to purpose. People don't follow instructions, they follow meaning. A strategic narrative explains what's changing, why it matters, and what the future looks like if we act, or if we don't. It simplifies complexity and gives people direction they can believe in. Step 4 is about cultural carriers, the individuals whose behavior shapes the norms of the workplace. These are not necessarily managers. They are the people others watch, the ones who model what is acceptable. When cultural carriers support the narrative, the organization moves. When they reject it, the organization stalls. Together, the narrative provides clarity, and the cultural carriers provide credibility. This combination turns information into influence, and influence into movement. Kotter's steps 5 and 6 are where change finally shifts from planning to acceleration. Step 5 is about identifying and removing real barriers, the ones embedded in systems, processes, and culture. These barriers show up as slow approvals, siloed communication, outdated norms, or even unspoken power dynamics. When leaders fail to dismantle them, momentum collapses before it has a chance to form. Step 6 introduces the engine that keeps people moving, short-term wins. But these wins can't be accidental. They must be intentionally engineered, visible achievements that are easy to communicate, easy to measure, and impossible to ignore. Short-term wins build confidence, reduce resistance, and signal that the change is real, not theoretical. The key insight: momentum does not appear on its own. Momentum is created, not discovered. It is built deliberately by removing friction and designing wins that pull people forward. Steps 7 and 8 are where change either becomes unstoppable or quietly dies. Step 7 is about sustained acceleration. Most organizations lose energy once the initial excitement fades. They mistake early wins for full adoption. Kotter's insight is that real transformation requires doubling down when others are relaxing, launching new initiatives, amplifying the wins, and removing barriers that re-emerge as scale increases. Acceleration is not speed for its own sake. It is controlled pressure applied at the right time to reinforce belief and prevent regression. Step 8 is institutionalization. This is where change stops being a project and becomes part of the organization's identity. It shows up in hiring practices, incentives, daily behaviors, and leadership expectations. Culture changes only when new habits are reinforced consistently, visibly, and structurally. Together, steps 7 and 8 convert momentum into permanence. They turn "we're trying something new" into "this is how we operate now." Key insight: change becomes culture only through reinforcement loops. Change fails most often not because leaders don't know the steps, but because they try to bend or reorder them. Kotter's model is not a menu. It's a sequence with structural interdependence. Each step produces the conditions necessary for the next. When leaders skip steps 1 through 3, urgency, coalition, vision, the rest of the system collapses into misalignment. Teams don't understand the why. Leaders can't reinforce the how. Execution gets reduced to task lists instead of transformation. Skipping step 5, removing barriers, traps teams inside old constraints. Skipping step 6, short-term wins, removes the emotional fuel the change requires. And skipping step 8, institutionalizing change, guarantees that the old culture resurfaces the moment pressure rises. The cost of breaking sequence is predictable. Early progress collapses, resistance resurfaces, teams lose trust, leaders lose credibility, the change dies quietly. The message for leaders is simple: order is not optional. Sequence is strategy. When the steps are followed, momentum builds. When they are broken, momentum leaks. Here's where everything connects. Kotter's 8 steps remain the backbone of execution, but execution alone doesn't sustain change. The tri-model framework ensures each step is reinforced by the systems and culture required to make it stick. Execution equals the movement of change. Capability equals the infrastructure that keeps it moving. Culture equals the behavioral environment that absorbs and sustains the change. And over all 3 sits performance intelligence, the 4th dimension, using AI-enabled feedback loops to detect friction early, adjust sequencing, and keep leaders aligned. This is how organizations move from one-time change efforts to continuous transformation. To close out episode 2, I want to give you practical tools you can use right away. Because Kotter's model isn't just theory, execution depends on simple, clear, repeatable methods. First, you'll get an 8-step quick guide that strips away confusion and shows each step in plain language. This is the version leaders should actually use. Second, the sequencing map, which visually lays out how the steps interact. what must come first, what can run in parallel, and where leaders typically break the chain. Third, a leader checklist, which helps you diagnose friction, culture barriers, capability gaps, and momentum risks before they derail your transformation. And finally, the downloadable Episode 2 workbook materials, which are designed for real organizational use, not academic study. You can use them to brief your teams, prepare for change initiatives, or bring clarity to your executive discussions. These tools set the foundation. In Episode 3, we'll take everything from process to capability, showing how the organization's architecture either supports or destroys change.